Picture this. Somewhere deep in the cold, silent void of space, where even light takes time just to move from one place to another, something is coming. Not shining, not moving like anything we understand, not making any sound at all, just existing, invisible, perfectly dark, completely silent. And the terrifying part is this: you would never see it coming, not until it's already too late. It moves past Earth at the speed of light, a speck, almost nothing, something your mind would simply ignore. And yet, in that exact moment, something happens. You feel it first, a subtle shift beneath your feet. Not an earthquake, not a vibration, something stranger, as if the entire planet forgot how to stay perfectly balanced for just a fraction of a second. You stop. Your breath changes. Your body reacts before your mind understands why. And then the thought arrives, slowly, unwillingly. This wasn't the event. This was just the first touch. And if that was only the beginning, what comes next? We like to believe space is empty, silent, stable, harmless, a vast nothing where nothing can reach us. But that belief is dangerous, because it's wrong. Out there, hidden in the darkness of the universe, there are objects that don't announce themselves. They don't glow. They don't warn you. They simply appear, too late to matter. And today, we're going to run a thought experiment that changes everything. We will let black holes of different sizes pass by Earth, one by one, from the smallest possible ones to objects so massive they can distort entire galaxies. And what happens to our world depends entirely on what passes by first. The first threat, the microscopic black hole. Right after the birth of the universe, everything was different. Space wasn't calm. It wasn't structured. It was violent, expanding, collapsing, boiling with energy. In that chaos, something strange appeared. Primordial black holes. Some of them were absurdly small, smaller than atoms, and yet heavier than mountains. But let's choose one. A black hole with the mass of Earth. Sounds impossible. But physics doesn't care about what feels normal. Here's the first shock. Its event horizon would be smaller than a coin, just a few centimeters across. Something you could hold between your fingers without ever realizing it contains a planet's worth of mass. And it would cross the solar system almost instantly, a fraction of a second. Too fast for any warning, too fast for any reaction. But speed is not the problem, not here. The problem is gravity, because this object doesn't behave like an object. It behaves like a planet, compressed into nothing. And as it approaches Earth, the first failure begins, quietly, at first. One side of the planet feels a stronger pull than the other, just slightly, just enough, and Earth begins to distort. Not break, not explode, distort, like something invisible is pulling it apart from the inside. And then it escalates, fast. The crust begins to crack under uneven stress. Fault lines awaken everywhere at once. Volcanoes erupt across continents simultaneously. Earthquakes stop being regional events and become global. Oceans respond next, not with waves, but with walls. Massive structures of water rising kilometers high, moving across continents like living barriers. And even if the black hole misses Earth entirely, the damage is already done, because the orbit shifts, slightly at first, but permanently. Move Earth closer to the sun, and oceans begin to boil away. Move it farther, and the planet slowly freezes into silence. And then comes the real nightmare. It doesn't miss. It passes through. And in that moment, reality stops behaving like something stable. Matter stretches, tears, unravels. This is not destruction in the normal sense. This is transformation into something unrecognizable. A process called spaghettification, where structure itself stops existing. And at that point, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. We were never safe to begin with. But that was only the smallest possible version of the nightmare. Now imagine something far more real, something that already exists in our universe. A black hole formed from the death of a massive star, 10 times the mass of our sun. It doesn't look like anything. It doesn't announce itself. But its influence stretches across distances that are almost impossible to comprehend. And here's the question. What happens if something like this enters our solar system? You don't get days. You don't get warning. You get about 5.5 hours. That's it. At first, nothing seems wrong. Space still looks normal. The stars are still in place. But that's the illusion breaking in real time, because the first victim is already being pulled apart. Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, begins to distort, slowly at first, then violently. Its atmosphere doesn't just swirl anymore, it bends, like something invisible is reshaping it from the inside. And then, Jupiter stops being a planet in the way we understand it. It becomes unstable gas under extreme gravitational stress. Next comes Mars, a smaller target, a simpler target, and it doesn't stand a chance. Either it's torn apart or thrown completely out of orbit, ejected into interstellar space like a stone fired from a cosmic slingshot. And only after that does Earth begin to notice. Because now the sky starts to change. The stars don't stay fixed anymore. They begin to drift, slowly, unnaturally, like the entire universe is being subtly dragged sideways. But that's not movement. That's light bending, gravitational lensing, space itself being warped by something you cannot see. And Earth is already inside that distortion field. At ground level, something feels wrong. Not immediately catastrophic, not explosive, just unstable. The ground doesn't feel fixed anymore, as if the planet has forgotten how to remain perfectly rigid. And then it escalates. Fault lines react. Continents begin to shift under stresses they were never designed to handle. And now, the timeline collapses. Everything speeds up. Oceans rise, not as waves, but as walls of water moving across entire continents, kilometers high, impossible in any normal Earth condition. The moon begins to lose stability. Its orbit becomes distorted, like it's being gently but irresistibly pulled away. And then comes the breaking point. If this black hole passes through Earth, everything happens at once. There is no gradual destruction anymore, only completion. The planet doesn't explode, it unravels, layer by layer, crust, mantle, core, all of it pulled inward at the same time. And the black hole doesn't slow down, it doesn't hesitate, it doesn't even register what it just passed through. It simply continues forward, as if Earth was never there. And now the scale shifts again, because this was still only a stellar black hole, a local destroyer. What comes next doesn't just affect planets, it affects systems. Now the scale changes completely, not in size, in reality, because at this point, we are no longer talking about objects that destroy planets. We are talking about objects that dismantle entire systems. The intermediate black hole, 1,000 solar masses. This is not a star's death. This is something far beyond that. A gravitational presence so extreme that it doesn't need to touch anything to begin destruction. It just arrives. And physics starts to fail around it. The solar system begins to lose structure, quietly at first, then all at once. Orbits that have been stable for billions of years start to drift, slowly, unnaturally. Planets are no longer locked in place. They are no longer orbiting. They are falling into instability, like a perfectly balanced system that suddenly forgot the rules holding it together. And Earth? It is already inside that collapse. At first, it feels like nothing, but that's how all endings begin. Then the atmosphere starts behaving differently. Pressure systems destabilize. Winds begin to shift in patterns that make no sense. Then the ground responds. Not violently yet, but inconsistently, like the planet is losing its internal coordination. And then it escalates beyond recovery. Hurricanes form with unnatural intensity, not seasonal storms, but global atmospheric collapse events. At the same time, the crust begins to fracture on a planetary scale, not in one region, everywhere, and all of it is happening together, not as separate disasters, but as one continuous breakdown of a world losing structural integrity. And then comes the final threshold. If this black hole passes through Earth, there is no after, no aftermath, no survival state. The planet stops being a single object. It becomes fragments under extreme gravitational separation, and those fragments don't remain fragments for long. They are pulled inward, disassembled, consumed by physics itself. What remains is not destruction. It is absence. A place where something used to be that no longer qualifies as anything at all. But even that is not the end of the scale, because now we reach something else entirely, something that stretches meaning itself. Phoenix A star, the supermassive black hole, 100 billion solar masses. At this point, language starts to fail, because nothing in human experience prepares you for this scale. This is not a large object. This is a gravitational event that defines space around it. Its influence extends farther than most solar systems combined, far beyond anything we instinctively think of as near. And when it begins to move, the solar system reacts before anything is even visible. Outer planets drift first, slowly abandoning their stable paths. Then the inner planets follow, their orbits no longer circles, but collapsing curves in a distorted gravitational field. And finally, Earth begins to feel it directly. The sky changes, not metaphorically, physically. Star positions shift in ways that make no astronomical sense. Light bends so strongly that familiar constellations become unrecognizable. And then the real destruction begins. Oceans rise, but not as tides, as planetary-scale displacement of mass. Hundreds of meters of water moving across continents. The atmosphere begins to escape Earth entirely, not blown away, pulled away, layer by layer. Then satellites fail, not by collision, but by orbital collapse. They fall like burning fragments of a broken sky, and at the closest approach, something happens that should not be possible. For a brief moment, even the sun is no longer the dominant gravitational reference. Earth becomes weightless. Everything not anchored to bedrock begins to lift. Buildings, vehicles, dust, oceans, all suspended in a collapsing equilibrium. And then, the reversal. Gravity returns violently, but the structure it returns to is no longer stable. The crust fractures globally, not in lines, in systems of failure. The orbit of Earth is no longer an orbit, it is a departure. The planet is ejected outward, into deep, cold interstellar space. No return path, no gravitational anchor, no future stability. And if the black hole passes through instead of nearby, there is no trajectory at all, only instant disappearance, as if the planet was never part of the system to begin with. At this point, there is nothing left to describe in terms of distance, only scale, and what that scale does to meaning itself. Because every step we've taken has been a reminder of one simple truth. The universe does not adjust itself to our existence. We started with something invisible, something so small it could pass through a planetary system in less than a second. And now we are here, at objects so massive they bend the structure of space itself. But the most unsettling part is not destruction, it is indifference, because none of this is personal. None of it is directed. None of it is meant to happen. It simply can. And that is enough. For most of human history, we believed space was distant, separate, harmless. We imagined the cosmos as a backdrop, a stage, something that exists far away from consequence. But that idea collapses here, completely, because what we've seen is not a distant universe. It is a system where everything is connected by forces we cannot negotiate with. And in that system, even Earth is not protected by importance, only by probability. A single microscopic black hole is enough to rewrite the surface of a planet. A stellar one is enough to dismantle an entire system of worlds. And beyond that, there are scales so large that even destruction stops being the right word. So the real question is not, what would happen if one of these passed by Earth? The real question is, why hasn't it happened yet? And the honest answer is uncomfortable, because space is not safe. It is just statistically quiet, for now. We exist in a narrow corridor of stability, between forces that are constantly active, but rarely aligned in our direction. And that stability is not guaranteed. It is temporary, which leads to something even more unsettling. Everything you know, everything we've built, cities, technology, memory, history, exists on a surface that is only stable because nothing extreme has intersected it recently. Not because it cannot, but because it hasn't. And that difference is everything. Because in a universe like this, time is not safety, distance is not protection, and invisibility is not absence. It is just delay. And yet, there is another side to this realization, one that is harder to explain. Because the same universe that can erase everything in an instant is also the only reason anything exists at all. Every atom in your body was forged in extreme cosmic events, in collapsing stars, in violent beginnings, in conditions far more extreme than anything described here. You are not separate from this system. You are made from it. Which means something strange is true at the same time. The universe is indifferent to you, and yet entirely responsible for you. And that contradiction is where perspective changes. Because if everything is fragile, then every moment of stability becomes meaningful. Not because it is guaranteed, but because it is temporary. The Earth is not a safe place in an absolute sense. It is a stable place in a chaotic system. And stability like that is rare. So when we look up at the night sky, what we are really seeing is not just distance. We are seeing probability. We are seeing everything that did not happen, and everything that still could. Because the next visitor does not need permission, does not need warning, does not need time. It only needs alignment. And that alignment could already be forming somewhere out there. Right now, silently, invisibly, moving through the dark. And the most important part is this: we would not know until it was already here, or already gone. And in that silence, there is only one thing left to understand. We are not the center of anything, not the goal, not the focus, not even a priority. We are a brief moment of structure inside something infinitely larger and completely indifferent. And still, we get to notice it. We get to think about it. We get to imagine it. We get to exist long enough to look at the universe and realize how impossible that is. So maybe the real miracle is not that danger exists out there. It's that for now, it is not here. And while that remains true, there is still time. Time to look up. Time to wonder. Time to understand how fragile everything is, without it disappearing. Because in the end, the universe does not promise continuation. It only allows moments. And this one is yours.